Erica Wilson on Nantucket. Some of you need no introduction to her, but some of you might not remember her or know of her, so I'll start with a very brief refresher. Erica taught students across the country how to do needlework of all kinds through her kits, books, and television shows from the late 1950s until her death in 2011. After her training at the Royal School of Needlework in London, she arrived in New York in 1954 to teach at a school in Millbrook, north of New York City. Here is what she looked like then. She was soon in demand as a teacher in suburban Rye and in New York City itself. In those first years in New York, she did 3 things that would put her on the path to becoming the famous Erica Wilson. Here are 2 of her better-known examples. Crewel work is embroidery in wool on linen twill. Compared to other embroidery techniques, crewel can be simple and relatively quick while giving visually striking results. Erica later told a reporter that in her first class in Millbrook, she taught a much more difficult technique, gold work, and that for the next class, all her students mysteriously fell ill. And so she said she switched to crewel. Maybe that's just apocryphal, I don't know. Second, she invented her correspondence courses. When a group of stitchers in colonial Williamsburg asked for her personal teaching assistance, instead of going to them, she created these 2 kits instead in 1959. They taught a vocabulary of stitches in the production of a finished piece. By then, she had married furniture designer Vladimir Kagan, and it was his drafting hand that produced the stitch illustrations. And then third, one of her students, an editor, suggested that she produce a book. Scribner's published it in 1962. Crewel embroidery was the first mainstream craft bestseller. This piece in Life magazine in 1963 credited the book and gave her national exposure, as did this piece in House and Garden, which also appeared in 1963, and then this one in Woman's Day, which appeared in 1964. So by then, Erica was living seasonally here on Nantucket, where the couple had a house at 34 Liberty Street. Probably 1957 was their first summer, although there are some variations in that date. Nantucket played 2 key roles in Erica's career and life. First, it was an inspiration for her work, and second, it was a destination for her and for her students, and I'll talk about both aspects. Amy has already mentioned some of the tourism aspects of this particular time in Nantucket, and it coordinates with that very nicely. In the last part of my talk, I will consider overall why Erica's pairing with Nantucket was so successful and so enduring in her life and career. So Nantucket was clearly an inspiration for many of Erica's stitch designs. This Nantucket harbor, of course, features the old mill. This design used crewel point, which Erica defined as the use of crewel embroidery stitches on the gridded canvas of needlepoint. So this design later appeared also as a quilt kit. Another version of the harbor appeared in this long stitch design. So it's not gridded, and you can see that it's simply over and over long stitches, which are not necessarily gridded. I suggest here that these harbor scenes were not just appealing and unique in the embroidery market at the time, which they were, but also that they were useful to Erica as she marketed crewel point as well as crewel. As these scenes, as you can see, lent themselves to the use of straight lines in squares, checks, and rectangles on the gridded canvas. This Nantucket window box did the same thing to great advantage. Erica also portrayed Nantucket and nautical themes in many other ways. This page from her 1977 catalog presents a whole set of Nantucket-themed projects. This illustration from Kenneth Graham's Wind in the Willows appeared in her Children's World book from 1980, and as we know, there is nothing half so much worth doing as messing about in boats. This ad for Nantucket Lights, which also shows Outward Bound by H. Marshall Gardner, was probably much later in the 1980s. And I like to think that this Owl and the Pussycat, offered in kit form in her 1971 catalog, was an ocean-going theme inspired here, but it was certainly about the right time. If you look closely at Erica's work, you can also see scenes that remind us of her personal life here. One of her longest lasting kits, reissued many times, was this one, Country Life. Also popular was this American pastoral landscape, which shows some similarities to the fishing ladies' silk pictures from the 18th century. Linda Eaton, my co-curator for the show on Erica at the Winterthur Museum next fall, has noted the similarity of these homes to Erica's own at 34 Liberty Street, so she surmises that they are the same. Because then this same two-chimney home appeared as a wallpaper as part of her collection Needleplay for General Tire. Yes, they were doing wallpaper. Erica said she thought they were going to ask her to design a tire, according to Vladdy, but it was wallpaper. She showed it off to great effect in her powder room at 34 Liberty Street with matching embroidered hand towels. And you can see perhaps also maybe Vladdy here in their sunfish in this early kit that was an Erica Wilson exclusive from Columbia Minerva and appeared in her 1971 catalog. And at Winterthur, you'll find this needlepoint pillow, which she made, also about 1971, commemorating her sailing days here with Vladdy. Along the edge of this box pillow is Vladdy's refrain, "I'm sorry I'm late. It's Erica's fault." In fact, apparently both were always notoriously late to social engagements. Erica was always late meeting a book or design deadline, and for her that always came first. She simply had to finish. This design by Erica was stitched by Edie and appeared in the embroidery book. Edie told me that she finally prevailed upon Erica to draw a whaling ship on woven looms fabric that Edie had purchased especially for this project, and that Erica drew it on the spot in indelible ink, putting 5 whalers in the boat and not 6, which Edie then had to correct. So this is the corrected version. Erica did not just use Nantucket for inspiration. She lived nearly half of every year here. So it was a destination for her and for her students and customers. And what do I mean by destination? A distant yet still recognizably American vacation home, a place that one could get away to for a more relaxed life, or at least imagine a more relaxed life. It was her country home, and she made it so for her customers as well. So now let's look at how she lived and worked here as portrayed in press reports, her books, and also in her own writing. Erica had recruiters to Nantucket. Edie was already a resident and found the Liberty Street home for them, which the Kagans rented and then later purchased. Another was Mary Ann Beinecke, whose daughter Julie you'll hear from tomorrow. She had been one of Erica's students in Rye. Mary Ann's husband, Walter, spearheaded a private initiative to restore much of Nantucket's downtown, most notably the Jared Coffin House. A companion program in that restoration was the teaching of skilled embroidery on the island. Erica's name figured prominently as a teacher for those embarking on the training in 1962. Her teaching did remain separate from that of Mary Ann's, but she assisted in the design for the Coffin House restoration. This is a look, I understand it, at one of the crewel rooms at the Coffin House that I don't know if they still exist, but they did. Afterwards, Erica taught at least once at Mary Ann's School of the Needlery. Erica credited her research on the Coffin House restoration with an introduction to Nantucket history, which then proved very helpful to her. Erica first taught on Nantucket, likely beginning about 1962. This ad from the gift shop, the Noisy Oyster, announces a show by Erica's students there that year. In those early years, she taught in the back garden at 34 Liberty Street, where children and adults were her students. Many years later, a reporter who visited the garden called it the perfect place to relax, although, as near as I can tell, Erica never did. This ad is from 1963. There was also sufficient demand for Appleton wool, and Erica sold that first out of the Noisy Oyster as well. Then she moved sales to her library at 34 Liberty Street. This sign, when placed by the hedge out front, would signal that her home store was open for business. In 1971, she opened her store here on Main Street, where you will still find it today, run by her daughter, Vanessa DeSario. That garden theme then became also the centerpiece of her travel program, the Nantucket Seminars, which began in 1974 and lasted for 10 years. At each week-long seminar were about 25 students who gathered at the Coffin House for a lecture and demonstrations, then broke into two groups. They learned the morning's techniques firsthand in Erica's and Edie's gardens. Now, these were not exclusively needlework seminars. Husbands and families were welcome at social events sprinkled throughout the week, with an opening cocktail party at Erica's home, a midweek gathering, and at the end, a clam bake on the beach. Vladdy would keep men in the group occupied in tinkering with his Model T. There was enough demand that in the summer of 1975, there were 2 seminars, and there would have been 3, except that Erica's books and the imminent filming of the second season of her television show forced its cancellation. The last one was in 1984. So like Erica's New York City apartment, her Nantucket home was filled with needlework that was always in use. Chair seats, sofa cushions, and chairs. I know, we think, But even when she was not teaching here, she was hosting parties, designing, and sometimes leading group needlework projects. She designed these kneelers for St. Paul's Episcopal Church, and thank you, Mary, for the photo. Interpreting the 148th Psalm, describing them as stitched in clear colors with the essence of Nantucket: sea, moors, seagulls, hydrangeas, and bayberries. And I haven't seen these yet, but I know they're on offer this afternoon. Some of the 200 kneeling cushions in needlepoint she designed for the Sconset Union Chapel, a project that began in 1991 and finished about 1995, stitched with an emphasis on Nantucket themes that included birds, historic sites, and wildflowers, as well as religious and wedding themes. So Nantucket was a persistent frame for Erica's life and work. Her family gathered around their tree at Christmas time for this photograph from her 1980 Christmas book. When she filmed and marketed her 4 videos of different handwork techniques, issued in 1998, Nantucket was the backdrop, with moors, Sconset, a pulpus sheep farm, and the oldest house as settings. And in her bride's book from 1989, Vanessa is here modeling a bridal gown with her now husband, Matt DeSario, who's wearing an embroidered tie and cummerbund in a distinctly and recognizable Nantucket setting. Erica kept stitchers coming to Nantucket even when market trends changed. In 1988, she hosted 63 cross-stitchers in her garden to teach this appropriately garden-themed piece, a Cloister Walk, which was from her Metropolitan Museum collection. In these last few minutes, I would like to consider just what it was about Nantucket that added to Erica's life and business. Nantucket was distant, but it was also part of a distinctly American history. It was part of the way in which Erica demonstrated her Americanness. She never lost her British accent, but she adopted the States as her home, including this island with its sailing and whaling history, a motif she put on a shirt here, as you can see. Nantucket's narrative of grit and determination in the face of harsh winters and harsher whaling lives represented a spirit that she was fond of referring to in her description of her kits. She said they echoed the confident, do-it-yourself attitudes of American colonists. As part of that same narrative, she marketed these for the celebration of the United States bicentennial in 1976. She also issued designs that evoked the familiar Deerfield, Massachusetts blue and white embroidery from the late 19th century. In an article on her 9th needlework seminar in Nantucket, the Inquirer and Mirror reported that the theme had been Nantucket itself. Participants drew inspiration from the island's wealth of wildflowers, butterflies, and dragonflies on the moors, from its proud history of wives who quilted while waiting for their men to return from the sea, and from its whaling captains who brought back precious silk and gold embroideries from their journeys to the Orient. A little romantic, but nonetheless, Nantucket. As craft interests changed in the marketplace, Nantucket permitted Erica to create a kind of lifestyle brand. She paired her Bride's book in 1989 and For the Baby book in 1991 with a bridal registry in her Nantucket store. This 1989 catalog, this is the cover, included Bermuda-length shorts, straw and Panama hats, handmade sweaters, and even Nantucket perfume. I'm not sure what that is, but home goods included these hydrangea fireboards and also a made-to-order quilt. You didn't have to do it yourself, you could order it. Erica had always been a kind of guide for her customers, finding for them new needlework techniques as she had done in her Needleplay books. She would introduce you to collectors, to other kinds of techniques other than straight needlepoint or crewel. So now, in the framework of her handmade home furnishings catalog, she introduced her customers to Elizabeth Bradley rugs and cushions and to Kaffe Fassett's needlepoint as a table setting. So this is indeed Kaffe. So in a way that now seems obvious, even inevitable in hindsight, Nantucket's narrative enhanced Erica's. She combined her business with her lifestyle. She was years ahead of others who have since done that. Erica's Nantucket home was open to friends, students, and reporters. Her kits and books included all kinds of finished products that could furnish it. And Nantucket offered the outdoors, a place that could be an American backyard. Now, not just any backyard, it's a very nice one. But in her press photos, she was at home at family picnics in the garden or teaching on the beach. Erica's images and her designs were not cosmopolitan in style or in aim. Had her photos and marketing featured New York City street scenes or Erica in front of her Madison Avenue store in lieu of Nantucket beaches and picnics, I think we would have had a very different image of Erica preserved for us today. Part of that lifestyle was domestic, populated by her husband and children, but part of it also was Nantucket. This would have been her 63rd summer on the island. Her home here was always spacious and open, filled with family, and surrounded by a beautiful garden where the weather was always fine and where it was always time to stitch. Thank you.